continuing the discussion of time. Time is God, the whole phenomenon of time and various discussions regarding time. So I'm continuing this discussion in relation to Vishnu Sahasranama, name 897, Sanat. I appreciate all those who are listening for giving their valuable time to listen in as I try to make some sense for our understanding from our tiny, tiny position in space and time to try to understand this mysterious phenomenon called time. And because I'll be looking at it from different angles, not only, or have been, scriptural, scientific, philosophical, there's going to be some overlapping and some repetition. So please bear with me. First thing I'm going to say in this talk is not repetitive. Something stuck in my mind. Now, we understand that everything we see, do, touch, taste, smell, feel, hear, everything we think about, even in dreams, it all makes an impression in our consciousness. Most of it goes deeply into the subconscious. We're not aware. We might not even be aware that we saw something. We don't take strong cognizance of it, but it makes an impression in our mind. Some things stand out. How many things stand out from, okay, I'm 66 years old now. I'm going to talk about something which I saw on television. This was maybe when I was about 8 or 10 years old. So we're looking back way over 50 years. And how many things stick in my mind? If you consider that moment by moment, so many things experienced, but this particular thing I saw, is a children's TV program, very popular, practically iconic. It's running on even to the present time. Science fiction TV program from the BBC called Doctor Who. So on this episode of Doctor Who, and I think that at least most people in Britain, and maybe it's exported to other countries also, but most people in Britain will be aware of this TV series called Doctor Who. So I remember seeing on that what happened in a particular episode is that time speeded up very quickly. And the heroes, Doctor Who and his compatriots, were running to get back to what's called the TARDIS. And if they go in that, they become free from this effect of quickly speeding up. But it just stuck in my mind how there was one young woman running, obviously an actress. She was running, and you could see her within half a minute. She became older, then she slowed down her running, and then she collapsed dead. And you could see just in half a second the passage of a body from young, good-looking, healthy, to aging, old, and dead. It made an impression on my mind. The nature of time decays. That's the anecdote. What is time? Time is a fundamental feature of reality, is it not? Well, that's disputed. Of course, in science, in philosophy, there is a dispute as to whether there is any such thing as reality whatsoever, as far as science is concerned, there really wouldn't be any science unless it was presumed that there is something out there called reality, and it's real and it's worth studying. However, in the philosophical tradition, going back to the Greeks that I've discussed somewhat, if we think about what is knowledge, all those things which are ultimately real according to various philosophical schools, if it's real, it must be changeless. If it's real, it's always true in all times and all places and all circumstances. But time, by its very nature, is interlinked with change. So that which is real, the absolute truth or God, is changeless, must also therefore be timeless. So time cannot, according to this idea, be a fundamental feature of reality at the intrinsic level. And we also have that in so many quotes which I read previously from Bhagavatam and from Srila Prabhupada's purports, that time is a feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which enables the material energy to manifest and unfold. And as we go through this series of talks, we'll come to a discussion of how God is indeed timeless, and in the spiritual world there is no time, at least not as we experience it. What do we experience? We experience time as being irreversible. But according to equations of physicists, as I discussed in the last talk, the equations which map the effects of time, they are reversible. So that we, conscious beings, see time as irreversible, could, according to this perspective, that could rather speak of our limited ability to perceive reality rather than time in reality being irreversible. You got that? The fact that we cannot perceive and cannot imagine time as being reversible, is that an actual fact, or is it just our limited ability to perceive and to conceive reality? In science, there is the concept of irreversibility, such as irreversible chemical reactions. The theory of evolution very much depends on a forward arrow. It doesn't go backwards. We don't get, at least in the theory, Darwin-Wallace biological evolutionary theory doesn't support devolution, because by the survival of the fittest, evolution in terms of improvement of species must be going one way, not backwards. So in various fields of science, I'm not saying I support that theory, I'm just saying how it relates to concepts of time. So certain scientists, according to their perspective, say that time is irreversible, and others say that, well, no, hey, look at the equations, it should be reversible, theoretically speaking. And this, of course, brings us to the concept of time travel, which has fascinated people since, which was that? Aldous Huxley wrote about that. He was the first to write about, at least the first to write a famous book, giving the concept of time travel. Just like the idea we can move between different points in space. We can move from London to New York. Takes a little time. We just can't boop, boop, go like that. Takes a little time. Time is required. But what if, staying in the same space, we could move backwards in time, or forward, or jump forward a long way in time? We can't do that. We go forward in time 1 second at a time. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. But what if we could jump forward 20 years, 50 years, 20 million years? And maybe we could move in time and space so that we end up in a completely different atmosphere. This Doctor Who series was one which was built around the supposition, or the idea that such travel is possible. Of course, it's science fiction, but that science fiction is still going on. Jumping forward in time is possible in a small way, just like astronauts on the International Space Station. They jump forward in time when they return to Earth because of the Earth's slower movement in relation to the International Space Station. Now, I'm just saying here what I've collected from various sources. How true it is, the demonstration of how true it is, beyond me. But I'm just giving more and more exposition of how difficult it is to understand this concept of time. And the various speculations that revolve around it. Traveling back in time, say you travel back in time, well, what happens if you try to change that which has already happened? Oh, that just reminds me, I didn't have it in my notes, but in another series of Doctor Who, just see how it impressed me, because the authors of the various series of Doctor Who episodes, they played around with concepts of time and space. It is semi-philosophical in some of the episodes. So one of the series, this is going way back, was called The Mad Monk, who was some monk who had found how to go back in time, and he wanted to change history. Perhaps the most famous year in the history of Britain, at least according to the history that I was taught when I went to school. The most famous year is the year 1066, the year of the Norman invasion. So the mad monk, he was going to go, or he went back in time, and he was trying to preempt the Norman invasion, which would have changed the whole history of Britain. And Doctor Who, who's a person in this series, Doctor Who's job was to try to preempt the mad monk from preempting the Norman invasion of England, so that I could pass my history test. Anyway, Doctor Who, of course, in such stories, the hero always wins. The mad monk wasn't able to do it. But it's a paradox. What if you could go back in time and change things so that history unfolds in a different way? Maybe in certain speculations connected with quantum theory, well, that might not only be possible, but factually is going on with at every nanosecond, the whole arrow of time is unfolding not along one path, but among multiple paths, so that there are multiple histories of which we are aware of only one. These are some of the implications that come out of certain interpretations of quantum theory. Backward time travel raises the grandfather paradox. What if, this is how the grandfather paradox goes, what if you go back in time, you find your, say, paternal grandfather before he has sired your father, and you kill your grandfather? So that means your father can't be born, which means that you can't be born. So far, backward time travel, there's no sign of it happening. And of course, many established scientists, if not the majority, they believe that although theoretically it might be possible to travel back in time, because of problems such as the grandfather paradox, travel into the past is impossible. Other questions that arise. Big Bang. That was a big bang. I just made a little squeak in relation to the Big Bang, which scientists very confidently tell us, or at least someone supposed to be scientific tells us, took place 13.799 billion years ago. That's a pretty accurate figure for something which we don't see it, but the idea is that when we're talking about science, we often say we now understand that germs produce disease. I may not understand exactly, but we often speak in terms of we, the body of knowledge which is subscribed to by scientists and bequeathed to the human race. So according to scientists, or at least some scientists, or whoever wrote this, which I'm quoting, we can measure cosmic background radiation as microwaves from the Big Bang. But there isn't any radiation with earlier origins, which just goes to show that the Big Bang, with a very big B, happened 13.799 billion years ago, which gives an idea that time has an origin, at least time as we perceive it within the universe which we're in, which is all we know about if we subscribe to the empiric, at the baseline empiric scientific method. It's also presumed that time must have an origin, because if it extended backward infinitely, then you'd have an infinite number of stars, right? Space and time go back infinitely, and then the whole night sky would be completely bright with so many stars. But wait a minute, the stars came into being because of the Big Bang. If there's no Big Bang and time went back infinitely, then how did the stars get there in the first place? Yes. More questions arise. Will time end? Okay, now we know for sure. Time has a beginning, there was a Big Bang, and just after that, a very short time after that, microsecond after that time began. There was no time, and then time began. Between the Big Bang and the beginning of time, there was a very short time. But that short time wasn't time because time hadn't begun. Okay, that's scientific. Now, will time end? What is the scientific answer to this? And the answer, here I am reading from a science manual. The answer to this question is unknown. So if one day time ends, all of a sudden Monty Python, Bigfoot comes down on all of us, or the good Lord comes flying out of the sky and chucks most of us into hell, then time will end. Speaking more scientifically, if the universe continues to expand forever, time will continue to be time. However, you never know. There can be the big recycle where you get a new Big Bang. You have one Big Bang, and then everything's going along, everyone's walking along the street talking about the Big Bang, and all of a sudden there's a new Big Bang. And at this point, our timeline would end, and a new one would begin, except we probably wouldn't be around to see it, because if there's a Big Bang, we're not likely to survive. But you never know. If there's a new Big Bang, everything quite likely will fall back into place just as it has after the first Big Bang, and then there'll be more people way down the line after they've all evolved from chemicals into microorganisms, and then separated land from water, from sky, and then we've all evolved into human beings, and then we could all speculate about the nature of time and the Big Bang all over again until we get blown to pieces by yet another Big Bang. Sounds like a lot of sense, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm just trying to talk a little bit according to what I'm reading in various scientific presentations. In experiments concerning particle physics, random particles arise from a vacuum. A vacuum means there's absolutely nothing in it whatsoever, but random particles arise in course of time. What will happen in future? Only time will tell. Calculation of time from the atom. Okay, let's get back to the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 3, we find in the discussion between Maitreya and Vidura, where Vidura is asking about how the whole creation comes into being, and it's quite different from the Big Bang story. But necessarily therein is discussion of the nature of time. And one of the chapters in that third canto is discussing the nature of creation of the universe, how everything within the universe comes into being. So one of the chapters, chapter 11, something like that, of Canto 3, Srila Prabhupada has titled that Calculation of Time from the Atom. So we can see that in Vedic culture, these things are already thought about. Calculation of time from our human perspective is based on motion, the motion of the sun and the moon and other planets, and ultimately goes down to movements of the atoms. The Bhagavatam discusses this. The Bhagavatam has time calculations ranging from millionths of a second up to the length of the creation, which is trillions of years. The passage of time which we observe is according to the movements of the sun, according to the movements of the moon. The movement of the sun demarcates night from day. Without that, our whole experience of reality would be very different to what we have now. We have at the polar regions 6 month days and 6 month nights, and it's difficult for people living in permanent darkness. Those who live far north, it's difficult for them to keep lively and chirpy. It's quite depressing to be in the dark all the time. We have circadian rhythms in our bodies which are according to time, according to the morning, the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, and according to that we rise in the morning, we eat at certain times, we sleep at certain times, we go to work at certain times. Scientists have seen that if consciousness of the rising and setting of the sun is taken away, if we're placed in a situation where we don't know what the time is, then our circadian rhythm, instead of being on a 24-hour cycle, goes into a 48-hour cycle. I had the experience once in Copenhagen, in the main train station. I was arrested for the heinous crime of trying to sell devotional paraphernalia. And as in England, also similarly in Denmark, there's a law that the police may detain someone without a warrant for up to 24 hours. So they brought me back to the cop shop, police station, and stuck me in a cell, took my watch, and in the cell was a bare light and no windows. So I had no idea how much time I was in there. I could only estimate. I didn't know whether it was day or night or whatever. But almost 24 hours later, they let me out. But I didn't know. I had no idea. Should I be sleeping now? Should I be chanting my rounds now? I didn't eat at all during that time. And as far as I remember, I didn't even get particularly hungry because I didn't have any reference frame to know whether I should be hungry or not. Anyway, the Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam has so much to say about time. We're talking about calculation of time from the atom upwards. Here's a translation of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 19, Text 7. Krishna speaking to Uddhava. Krishna says, the material body and mind composed of the three modes of material nature attach themselves to you, the living being. But they are actually illusion, since they appear only at the present, having no original or ultimate existence. How about that? Now, we already discussed that time, as Augustine perceived it, is illusory. It doesn't really exist because you can't pin it down. The past is gone, the future does. The past is gone and therefore doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. And the present, as soon as we try to pin down the present, it's already gone. So that also doesn't exist. So what Krishna is saying here is that everything we see in this world can also be said not to exist because it's it is perceived to exist within time. Krishna is saying this to make the point that the various stages of the body, birth, growth, reproduction, maintenance, dwindling, and death, how can any of these various stages of the body have any relation to this self, the Atma, which is eternal? These phases which the body and everything in the world goes through are phases. They didn't exist previously. Ultimately, they won't exist. The body, we can say it exists at the present, but that's also not definite. So why identify with this body when we should understand that we are eternal, changeless, timeless, spiritual beings? There's a thought from the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Measuring time. How do we do that? Days and nights, 7 days in a week, right? 7 days in a week. It's there in the Indian calendars, it's there in the ancient Greek and Babylonian calendars, and Western scholars will say that, well, the Indians got it from further west, the Greek and the Babylonians, but in Vedic culture we understand that there's much preceded that of the Greek and Babylonian culture, so the West got it from the East and not vice versa. In the ancient Roman civilization, we say ancient because it's from our vantage point 2,000 years ago, so ancient. It's not that long actually. But it seems that the Romans, they sometimes had an 8-day week. Is it arbitrary, splitting weeks into 7 days? What about the order of the days of the week? What about the beginning of the day? When does it begin? We have the day beginning at midnight. Although actually, if we want to be more correct, the day begins at sunrise. That's the actual beginning of the day. But for chronological purposes, we measure it as beginning at midnight. It could have been any time within 24 hours. If 24 hours seems to be a pretty good breakdown for a day. Although a day, in terms of the movements of this earth in relation to the sun or whatever you want to call it, it's not exactly 24 hours, which is why we have leap years. Okay, now let's have a look at linear and cyclic time, considering that we're discussing the Greeks, ancient Vedic culture. In Vedic culture, time is understood to be cyclic. Okay, that's there. When we talk about days, one day follows another, day and night, that's cyclic. But we're talking about the massive ages of the solar system. Islamic and Christian theologians adopted the idea that time is linear. God made the world, and at one time he'll close it all down, and then it's all over forever. He started it at some point in time, and he'll finish it forever. Even as a kid, I thought, this sounds a bit strange. Why would he do that? Just, if you consider God is eternal, and all of a sudden he decides to make the world, and then he makes a bunch of people, throws them into the world, decides that most of them will go to hell forever, and at some point has a judgment day, folds it all up, takes some of them back to heaven and throws most of them into hell. And it's just a blip in time for God. That didn't make sense to me, even as a child being raised in that idea. But it was an ancient idea which preceded the theology of Islam and Christianity, which the theology of Islam didn't begin with Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Lord Jesus Christ. The theology and the philosophy came later, both in the Jewish culture and Zoroastrian culture, which preceded Christianity and therefore necessarily preceded Islam. There is the idea that the universe was created at a definite moment in the past. What is that definite moment in the past? In the good year of the Lord, 1611, one Bishop James Ussher calculated, according to descriptions in the Bible, that the beginning of time occurred with God creating the world on October the 23rd, 4004 BCE. So there you are, October the 23rd, although there was no January, February, March in that, but it just, October the 23rd, everything came into being. There are still quite a few Christians around nowadays who believe more or less the same thing, and they are, in the eyes of many others, laughing stocks. A Christian who believes this, that the world was created approximately 6,000 years ago, that was a tough arithmetic there. A devout Christian and a secular scientist, agnostic or whatever, they may differ regarding when it began. We had from the halls of science that the starting point, I just read that, 13.799 billion years ago, which is quite a bit of time, quite a long time before 4004 BCE. However, whether you're a fundamentalist Christian or a secularist, they all agree, they may differ, they may differ on when the starting point is, but they all agree that there is a starting point. It begins with a certain event, whether it's God's divine whim or whether it's a big bang. It starts and then it goes on in a linear fashion with various events unfolding by which we can understand that there is time. The Vedic worldview has a very different understanding. First of all, well, specifically the Vaishnava understanding is that time is a manifestation of Krishna. So it has its roots in the divine, as does everything else. Secondly, Kala, time, the time factor. In the Vedic understanding, it refers not merely to the measured passage of time, but the way time moves things according to their destiny. Now, of course, in secular science also, time is what you measure. Now the time is such and such, and there is also the phenomenon of time. But the phenomenon of time in the Vedic, Puranic understanding is, well, let me read from Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 54, Text 14, from the purport. In the Vedic context, Kala, time, does not refer merely to a system of measuring planetary movements such as days, weeks, months, and years, but rather to the way things are being moved, the agency behind it. Everything is moving according to its destiny, and this destiny is also described as time. There are various words for what we call in English destiny. In Sanskrit we have Daiva, Proktan, Dishta, these are some of the terms. Bhagya and Kala, time. Everyone's destiny is revealed, it unfolds, and it is also imposed by the movements of time, inexorable time. In a letter, one Srila Prabhupada wrote in a letter about time, destiny, and karma. In one sentence, he summed it all up. Srila Prabhupada wrote, time mixes with the material energy just like a flower bud. In due course of time, the bud fructifies and comes into flower, or like a time bomb. In due course, it bursts out. Now, in the Vedic worldview, another difference, a major difference which we want to get into here, is that the Vedic understanding of time is that it is cyclical. It's not linear. Time goes in cycles. This Vedic cyclical conception of time was not only in India, but as the Vedic culture was spread all over the world, it was shared by many ancient civilizations. Knowledge, according to the Vedic worldview, knowledge of various arts and scientists. According to the Vedic worldview, the knowledge of various arts and sciences, including Vedic astronomy, including the Vedas themselves, including important personalities in universal affairs such as Brahma and the 7 rishis, so many important persons, the avatars of Vishnu. They appear and disappear. They come into being. They manifest within the material world and become unmanifest at regular intervals. That also means that what we presently experience may be very different from what existed in the past. We have the idea at the present time that now we're so advanced materially, but we understand from the Vedic literature that previously people didn't have this technology which pollutes and is noisy and everything. But for instance, people want to go from one place to another. Persons who are perfect in yogic powers, and it used to be quite common, can just wish themselves from one place to another. Or slightly less advanced, they have vehicles whereby they can move at tremendous speed from one part of the universe to the other without any pollution or noise or crashing. So such things are described in the Vedic literature, and we tend to write that off as some kind of fairy tales. But what's actually happening is that we have lost that technology. It will be revived again in future because time is cyclic. There's so many technicalities involved in understanding cyclic time. I'll get into it a little bit in the next session, discussing calculation of time from the atom in the next session, the next time. Thank you for giving your time to listening. It's not easy topics, no doubt, but these are discussed in the Vedic literature. It's not only Krishna dancing with the gopis. That's the essence, but there's a lot more there in the Bhagavatam. Also, many things are presented for us to understand. We should discuss these things. And of course, the question of time is a big question in philosophy and science, which is why I'm taking time, several sessions, to discuss all these points regarding time. So, Krishna willing, see you next time. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya Dante nitaya chunakang padiya nipatya kutva chaka kushataveta. Hey sadhava sakala eva vihaya durad Gauranga Chandra Charne Kurutanuragaha Parivadatu Jano Yata Tatava Nanumukarana Vayam Vicharayamaha Hari Rasa Madhira Madati Matta Bhujano Tama Vatama Nirvishama Baha Puram Nakavaravapu Kanaya Kanikaram Pibradvasa Wu. Kalaka Kapishang Vajayanti Jamalam Nandrang Venor Adara Sudaya Purayam Gopamandaya Vrindaranyam Swapadaramanam Pravishanti Tikiti Shri Radhaya Pranayamahima Ki Vishabhanayama Swadyo Yenadbhuta Madhurima Ki Vishabhamadiya Sokyang Chasya Madhanu Bhavata Ki Drishang Viti No Bhat Tadbhavadhya Samajani Sachidarva Sindhu Harinduhu Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama